Today we're going to work on the 100-year armor challenge. This is we're going to take armor, paint it as if it's day one of being made, super shiny, super beautiful, just straight reflective metal. And we're slowly going to degrade it until it feels like it's 100 years old. Before we do this, let's go through a couple of ideas about how to paint armor. We're going to paint all of this in black and white, and then I'm going to show you how to integrate color into your armor painting practices. Let's talk first about just painting super reflective metal. Let's say we have something like this, which is a pretty normal structure for some of these arm pieces that we're using. If we were to generalize what's happening, most of it is cylindrical. Some of it's conical, and then some of it's rounded. But our base understanding comes from what's happening in the cylinder. So what is happening? We start off by grabbing a mirror and then curving it. The interesting part about this is that when it is highly reflective, right when we first made the armor, it really truly is just a mirror. All of these lines that we're seeing are not inherent to the metal themselves. They're reflections of things around the metal. So whatever's on this side is reflecting something over there. The things that are at the top are reflecting, let's say, skylight coming from above, and then reflecting things that are happening over on this side. But because we've grabbed the metal and turned it like this, all of these metal reflections feel stretched out on the long axis and compressed on the short axis. So as a rule of thumb, whichever way the cylinder is facing, we're going to get reflections coming across it like this. If it's big enough, we might get reflections at the top that we don't see at the bottom. But if we're just starting out, we can think about this as reflections going up and down the cylinder. It's always going to follow the length of the cylinder. You can see this in this piece up here. The parts of the armor in the forearm are all going down this way. And so that's the direction that our reflections are going. The parts in the upper arm are coming down this way. And so likewise, the movements of the reflections are all headed down this way. And then we have something like this, where we have one piece of metal that's been turned, and so the direction of the reflections also turns with it. But not everything's a cylinder. Some things, like this shoulder guard, are much more rounded. And so we start to see this as, again, reflections, but they don't have a single direction. These reflections are all reflecting things going outwards from the central direction until we start to get a little bit more directional down this way. But even still, it's much more rounded than the cylinder below it, and so it doesn't have quite as much directionality to the reflections. Now, when we're dealing with armor, there's some more interesting things going on than simply reflections on a cylinder. We start to have things like this, where we have a cylinder of metal, and then that metal is hemmed at the side. And so while our reflections are very singularly directional this way, when it starts to meet the hem, what it's really doing is meeting a part in the metal that's curving like this, or alternatively, like this. And so what's happening at the top ends up being different. We start to see that the reflections move a little bit off to the side as we approach the hem, and that the hem has its own reflections. And so we get a lot more interesting ornamentation happening with the reflections around the armor. Then we start to stack our hemmed cylinders right next to each other, like we can see up here and all the way across. And the interesting part to note is that we're presuming that there's imperfections in how they're stacked. They're not exactly the same cylinder in exactly the same place. They might dislodge each other, they might jostle around a little bit. And so the reflections, likewise, won't be in exactly the same positions. Just like the hem is going to move our reflections a little off to the side, these different cylinders, being slightly misaligned, are going to have slightly different placements of the reflections. And so this shadow, for example, goes up, it'll come across with the hem a little bit, and then reset here a little bit offline. And this is all going to help our reflections feel a little bit more natural, a little bit more organic and real life, rather than everything feeling way too perfect all the time. The last thing to note that we're going to see up here is that if we can have a tighter cylinder, a cylinder that is much smaller, and a cylinder that's wider, and these things are going to fit on top of each other, in and around each other, and that a tighter cylinder is going to have different spacing in its reflections than a larger cylinder. Now, it doesn't all have to be complicated. This is just very important to know and understand and get these ideas down in case you want to be drawing this from imagination, or so that you can see the patterns that are happening in real life from whatever reference you're using. But the important part is that you know the patterns so that when you see them, you can interpret them for what they are. Now let's start painting and talk a little further about what makes this armor at the start of the 100-year challenge feel like it is truly metallic and reflective. So let's start the 100-year armor challenge. Our goal at first is to paint this as if it is straight off the lot, straight out of the forge, brandly newly buffed and perfectly shiny. And to get this shiny effect, what we're really doing is placing that highlight in. You can see that one right there, this perfect highlight that runs through. And this is gouache, so we can layer, we can get everything else over the top. And it's this main highlight and its relationship to everything around it that's going to really give us this shiny feel. So right now, we don't have to worry about anything other than where is this main highlight and how does it relate to the things around it. And this is one of the things that really gets us into a position of feeling like something is shiny. In normal everyday relationship of objects that we're painting that are not shiny, we're gonna have a gradual transition out of our shadows into our lights. And right now, we're not thinking about shadows at all. And this transition from the shadow to the light, or rather from our dark to our light, is almost immediate. Now, this is a thing that doesn't happen in matte objects. And so just placing this in really starts this relationship of the shiny metal. It's perfect. And so now that I have that main relationship in, I can start to get some of these other reflections in. Always thinking about the direction that the armor is in. I'm thinking about the environment. When we get to painting in color a little bit later, we'll talk about color in the environment and how this really starts to play a big role in what we're doing. But right now we're just thinking light and dark. Now, to keep this organized, I am really going to have this main highlight be pretty much the main highlight. It always has to be a little bit lighter than everything else, just to keep essentially the architecture and the structure of what I'm doing. I can put in other little lighter and darker sections within everything else, but if I want this clarity and the clarity that I'm seeing in the reference that I'm painting from, I'm really going to just keep this structured. And for a little bit of variety's sake, I've got the main shoulder girdle, the shoulder at the top and those first two panels coming down. I'm giving them a little bit more texture. They're still super shiny. They're still going to give the same reflective metal, but it feels like they've been hammered into place. Now that we have these vertical light structures down, I want to come in and really articulate some of the other ornamentations. This is going to help the armor feel a little bit more three-dimensional, even still, a little bit more interesting, give it a little bit more structure. But this is the main idea, to have a really high sense of clarity in the painting at this point. And now we get to the fun part. We get to start degrading this. I'm going to start by pulling in some scratches using a white or near white to get the damage in, as well as a little bit more dense. And to do this, we're taking this highlight in the armor and we're extending it out, not by creating perfect structures, but rather by biting a little bit more into the light and letting the light bite a little bit more into the darkness. And I'm using my finger a little bit to smudge it so it's not perfect. But as this metal shines and scratches, it's going to lose this sense that it's really truly a mirror wrapped around somebody's arm and start to work towards being matte, which is to say much less reflective, much more painted with light and shadow in mind. So we're pulling the lights into the shadows a bit more. We're pulling the shadows into the lights a bit more, leaving little highlights, little dings in the armor where we do really get to see things. But you can see we go from this stage of our highlights right next to our darks, and this being the thing that makes it feel super reflective. And we're messing up that relationship. so that instead of white right next to black or white right next to gray, we really are creating movement, gradual movement in between. And we very quickly lose this sense, this hyper sense of reflectivity. The relationship between our lights and our darks becomes one of patterns running into each other, rather than solid monolithic structures separated side by side. Now, if you want to learn to paint with gouache like this, I have a free online workshop called The Roadmap to Painting with Gouache, where I show you how I would learn to paint with gouache if I were to try all over again. The link to that is in the description below. And the goal is really to save you the years that it took for me to learn to paint with gouache. So you can do it much quicker. You can grab your gouache, take it with you, and paint whatever you want. Now, let's talk about bringing color into the game. Here's a painting that I painted just a little while ago. This time around, we're still thinking in these cylindrical column-like structures, but we're thinking in color. Every light and every shadow has its own distinct sense of color involved. And if you're painting from life like I am right here, it's just a matter of looking at the colors, getting a sense for what is going on. And if you're painting from imagination, we start to think about what is it in the environment around the armor. What colors are these things? Is there a light like this blue coming from the windows or coming from the sky? An orange or a yellow like this iridescent light, our main highlight here. And what color is it? It's very easy to try and push into the whites like we just did. But when you're dealing with color, really nothing ends up actually ever being white. Rather, we want to push the colors, allow our yellows to be yellow and our blues to be blue and our purples to be purple. And in doing this, we're going to gain the sense of really rich color and environment. And at first, when you put it down, it's probably going to feel too dark. But the minute you give it context, the minute you pull in these deep, dark shadows here, it no longer feels like we're putting in dark colors. Rather, it feels like a really vivid, beautiful highlight. A reflective armor like this, a suit of armor, is going to really have a lot of color involved. But overall, this is my challenge to you. Paint a suit of armor. Either from imagination or from a reference, paint your armor as if it is day one, off the lot, big, beautiful, and shiny. Then take a photo of it. Then start to degrade it. Really pull in the scratches, the 100 years worth of damage. You're going to very quickly learn what makes something feel shiny and new and metallic, and what makes it feel like it's lived a couple of years.